All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. I'll begin by thanking our sponsor, our Talmud Torah sponsors, for the month of Cheshvan, Meir and Rachel Gold, for dedicating all of the Shiurim and Droshos this month in memory of Yonah, Tzvi, Ben Yosef, Chaim, Elazar, HaKohen, and Noam Leah Efron in honor and celebration of the 98th birthday of Noam's grandfather, Yosef Hershel, Ben Mordechai Halevi. We also thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Jack Bennett, for dedicating the learning this week in memory of Givati Brigade Lieutenant Asaf Rosenfeld, who fell in battle on February 26, 1998 in southern Lebanon. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, and all those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. But with that, let us begin. We have an incredible daf ahead of us today. We actually have a lot to do today, hence our little bit of an earlier start. Thank you for accommodating. Today's daf is Chav Vav 26, but we are picking up in Meretz Hashem at the Mishnah, the new parak, on Chav Hey Amud Beis 25b. So it says in the Mishnah, both say beautiful Mishnah ahead of us. Ra'u Beis Din B'Chol Yisrael. So both say here's the case. Okay, still continuing. Actually, I just want to point out something very interesting. This is actually the title of the parak is Ra'u Beis Din. Okay, which usually the title of the parak, it just goes after the first Mishnah. So this Mishnah once again speaks about Kiddush HaChodesh. What I just want to point out to you is this is actually the last Mishnah that speaks about Rosh Chodesh. Excitingly enough, right after this, we are about to transition into the halachas of Rosh Hashana, the halachas of Shofar. So again, even though this is the beginning of the parak, this is actually the only Mishnah in the parak that discusses this. Okay, so Ra'u Beis Din B'Chol Yisrael. So here's the case. Following situation: Beis Din, the actual Beis Din itself, the Beis Din HaGadol, the Sanhedrin, and Kol Yisrael, and everyone, all Jews, see the new moon. So I will say, in the previous case we've been discussing, is you had two witnesses who saw the moon. In this case, everyone saw the moon. Ro Beis Din V'Chol Yisrael, Nechkuru Ha'edim. The witnesses were cross-examined, right? They were questioned. V'lo hispiku lomar mekudosh ad shechashecha. But here's what happened. So all the pieces were in place to declare the new month. So let's just keep a very simple case. Everybody saw the moon on night 30, right? Witnesses saw the moon, Beis Din, so everyone saw the moon. Good, witnesses show up in Beis Din on day 30. Beis Din does all the drishos v'chakiros, all the cross-examinations, and they're ready to go, right? Everything is perfectly lined up. What ends up happening? They run out of time. That's what ends up happening. They just simply ran out of time. So what happens? So therefore, they never got a chance to declare the new month while it was still day. Harei zeh me'ubar. By definition, it becomes a full month. So in other words, I will say the failure to declare the new month on day number 30 automatically creates an additional day in that month. Okay, Ra'u Beis Din Bilvad. So we'll say that's case one. We'll analyze these cases in the Gemara. Ra'u Beis Din Bilvad. What happens if Beis Din saw it? So we'll say this is an interesting case. Let's say you have a following situation. Beis Din themselves saw the new moon. They themselves saw the new moon. Yamdu Shnayim v'ya'idu b'fneihem v'yomru mekudash. So we'll say, let's assume right now that we're dealing with the Sanhedrin, 71 judges. So let's say the Sanhedrin, they're having a holiday party, whatever they're doing, right? They're together, having they're just whatever it is. And Lamaisa again, so they all see the moon together the night 30. So we'll say, what's the halacha? The next day, Yamdu Shnayim, two of them should separate from the rest of the group, and they should give testimony in front of the rest of the Beis Din, and as a result, Yom Mekudash. So we'll say, so what's happening in this case over here, the Sanhedrin as a group saw the new moon, so the procedure is, two of them separate from the group, become witnesses, and they testify in front of the rest of the group, which serves as the Beis Din. Rosh Beis Din. What happens if three people go ahead and see the new moon and they're a Beis Din? Yamdu Hashana. So said again. It's interesting in this Mishnah because generally we've assumed that the only body vested with the ability to Mekadesh the Chodesh is the Sanhedrin, right? 71 judges. Tosfos discusses over here that we could be talking about a Beis Din of 23 judges. And under extenuating circumstances, you could have a Beis Din even of 3 judges who declares the Nemus. So the Mishnah is just going through all of the different cases. So Beis Din, if you have 3 people who are a Beis Din, and I will say all 3 of them see the new moon, so what's the halacha? Yamdu Shnayim, 2 of them should separate, they become the witnesses, the Yoshivu Mechaverehem Eitzel HaYachid, and they find a couple of additional guys, to join the one remaining judge to serve as the Beis Din. V'ya'idu b'fneihem, they give their testimony in front of the Beis Din. V'yomer mekudash mekudash. And the Beis Din then declares mekudash mekudash. She'ein hayochid ne'eman al yedei atzmo. Because of course one person is not believed to be an aid for Kiddush HaChodesh. So therefore I will say, interestingly enough, 3 different cases. Case number 1 is where the large Beis Din sees the moon. Again, two of the people separate out. They serve as witnesses, testify before the rest of the group. Second case, actually I should only say, right? Second case is where 3, right? 3, a Beis Din of 3 sees it. 2 of them separate out, become witnesses. And again, obviously you need more than 1 to serve as the Beis Din. You get another 2 to sit with the Beis Din. Good. So says the Gemara. Well, so let's go back to the first case in the Mishnah. Lamli lemisnaro Beis Din l'chol Yisrael. So we'll say, remember again, case number 1 of the Mishnah was where the Beis Din and all of Am Yisrael saw the new moon. Remember, what happened in case number 1 of the Mishnah? What happened in case number 1? They ran out of time. On day 30, they're questioning the witnesses, testimony checked out, but by the time they get around to actually declaring the new month, it's already dark. So the Gemara says, by the way, why do you have to say that the Beis Din and Kol Yisrael, all of Am Yisrael saw the new moon? Why do you have to say that? So the Gemara says, listen to this. Because you might have thought in a case where the new moon was so public and so apparent that everyone saw it, even though you didn't get a chance to formally declare the new month on day 30, come on, it's declared, right? Everyone saw it. Kamash Malon, no. They both say Kamash Malon, and this is really fast, Kamash Malon, there's a process. And we'll say, this is, I remember when I was young, I used to do my math homework with my father. So my father is very, very, very gifted in math and science. Skipped a generation, like profoundly skipped a generation. So I remember I used to do math problems, and and if I write the answer, so he would say, show the work. You have to show the work, right? Because in order to learn, which again, I'm not gonna lie, I was very resentful of as a kid, right? But Lamais is absolutely correct, and not just correct in math, but correct in life. That if you want things to really be done correctly, there has to be a process. People who kind of live life in general by just like chap plop, and there's no process. You're not showing your work. Sometimes things work out. Sometimes they work out. More often than not, they don't. There has to be a process. There has to be a framework. So that's the Gemara saying over here. Everyone saw the new moon. But there's a process. And what's the process? The process is that Beis Din says, Mekudash, Mekudash. That's the process. So the Gemara says, the Tanalei Ra'ua Beis Din l'chol Yisrael nechkura idim lamali. So okay, so then listen to how the case is structured. Beis Din saw it. All of Klal Yisrael saw it. The witnesses were cross-examined. Why do you need that phrase? V'nechkuru ha'edim. Hachi kamar. This is what it means to say. Inami nechkuru ha'edim v'lo yispiku l'mor mekudash ha'shech ha'shecha harei zeh me'ubar. That even if everything is in place, right? Everything is in place. And again, the Beis Din saw it. The witnesses saw it. Klal Yisrael saw it. But the witnesses were cross-examined. But again, if you're already telling me that it's supposed to say, so once again, it contributes to the Havamina. So here's what the case is, right? Beis Din saw it. Klal Yisrael saw it. You questioned the witnesses. Their testimony checked out. You did everything. The only thing you didn't get to do was what? Was to say Mekudash. You just didn't get to say the words. So you would have thought that, come on, that's Mekudash, right? That's good, you're ready to go. Kamash Malon, no. The process is the process. So the Gemara says, well, at the end of the day, if it became dark, so why do you have to even bring up that the Eidim are cross-examined? Beis Din does not sit in session at night. We've spoken about this, right? This is why halacha l'maisa. If you forget Ya'aleh v'yavo tonight, is Rosh Chodesh haba aleinu l'tova. So if you go ahead and you forget Ya'aleh v'yavo in Meir of Rosh Chodesh, what's the halacha? You do not have to repeat. Why not? Because Ya'aleh v'yavo is the way we sanctify the new month. And it mirrors Beis Din sanctification. Beis Din did not sanctify at night because they're not in session at night. So if I forget Ya'aleh v'yavo, I don't have to go back either. So the Gemara says, once it became dark, why are you even getting into Chakira Sid? Once it becomes dark, we're done. To which the Gemara says something amazing. It's tzarich chamina to have it chakiras edim kitchilas din umekudash mekudash kigemar din. This is fascinating. We both say it is true that halacha lemaisa Beis Din does not sit in session at night, but there is an interesting exception to this rule. What's the exception to this rule? So the Gemara says, before we get to the exception, the Gemara says, I would have thought that in the Kiddush HaChodesh process, it goes like this. The cross-examination, I should say the examination of the witnesses, that's what we call Tchilas Din, the beginning of the Din, the beginning of the process. And the actual articulation of Mekudash, that's the Gimar Din. But it's one process. In other words, there are bookends. Right, the beginning of the process is the examination of the witnesses. The end of the process is Mekudash. Now, if that's true, watch this. And if that's the case, then even when the process ran into nightfall, past Chashecha, you should still be able to declare the new month. Why? Midi dehavia dine mamanis. Listen to this, because it should be like financial law. This non dine mamanis done in bayom the gomen balayla. I will say, what's the halacha? If Beis Din begins a monetary case by day, but they have not reached a verdict by day, they are permitted to continue into the night. Right? So I'll say, so by monetary law, even though again we don't judge at night, if something started during the day, you could finish it up at night. I would have thought Kiddush HaChodesh should be just like monetary law, and therefore again, the examination of the witnesses is the Tchilas Din. Once you start that, and what's the end of the process? What's the end of the process? What's the end? Mekudash. Once you started during the day, I would think that you have the ability to finish it even at night. Kamashmala, no. Kamashmala will say that no. That Allah, so once it becomes nightfall, you're done. Right? Beis Din is closed for the day. And again, even if the Beis Din saw the moon, Klal Yisrael saw the moon, you had the examination of the witnesses, but you didn't get a chance to say Mekudash before nightfall. Halacha l'maisa, we don't do it. Again, it becomes a 31-day month. Rabbi says, as we've seen before, is Beis Din Mekadesh the Chodesh on a 31-day month? No, because it's Mekudash Me'ilab. So interesting enough, in that case, where all the pieces were done, but they didn't get the same Mekudash. That's all they're missing over here. Rabbi say, again, sometimes in life, the difference between success and failure is the ability to move yourself those last couple of inches, right? It's only an inch, right? It's only an inch between before the finish line and after the finish line. But that inch makes all of the difference to completing the particular initiative in life. You have everything in this case. We saw the moon, Klal Yisrael saw it, the Beis Din saw it, the witnesses are perfect, they're fantastic, everything is great. All you're missing is one word, well, three words altogether, right? The Rosh, the Av Beis Din Mekudash, everyone else says Mekudash, and we're done. But the failure to move that last inch, and I both say, isn't this the greatest challenge in life? How many of us have like a closet full of life initiatives that I've almost finished, right? I'm so close, but whatever the reason, often for whatever the reason, interest wanes right before the finish line. I'm right there, but and it's close enough, but it's not close enough. If you don't cross the finish line, you don't cross the finish line. The project is not complete. The initiative is not complete. The goal is unmaterialized. What an incredible musar. If you don't get to the finish line before it's dark, you didn't finish. No matter how close you are, it's not done. So the Gemara says, but why not? Why don't we say that the chakiras ha'idim should be the tchilas din, Mekudash should be Gimar Din, and as long as you start by day, you should finish at night. Amar Kra, here we go. Ki chok li Yisrael hu mishpat lelokei Yaakov. And I both say, now remember again, the Gemara quoted this pasuk before, much earlier on in the Masechta, as a reference to Rosh Hashana. But of course, Rosh Hashana is also Rosh Chodesh. So the pasuk says, Ki chok li Yisrael hu mishpat lelokei Yaakov. Emas havi chok. Oh, if you look at Rashi, by the way, Rashi says, Mishpat hainu tchilas din. So the way the Gemara is darshaning the pasuk is like this: Ki chok li Yisrael hu mishpat lelokei Yaakov. Emas havi chok. When is something considered to be a statute? B'gimar din. When the matter is completed. V'kakari le'rachmana mishpat. Yet here by Rosh Chodesh, the Torah calls the chok, the Gimar Din, the declaration, the final completion of the declaration of Rosh Chodesh, it calls it a mishpat. It's a chok when it's completed, but it calls it a mishpat. Ma mishpat bayom av hachanami bayom. Just like mishpat, justice, right, the verdict in a Beis Din can only be delivered by day, so too again, Kiddush HaChodesh could only be done by day. So therefore, that's the first halacha in the Mishnah, that the actual Mekudash must be delivered by day, and if not, then ultimately it automatically becomes a full 30-day month, and Rosh Chodesh will be on day 31. Incredible. Says the Gemara, let's go right there. So remember again, next case in the Mishnah, Sanhedrin sees the new moon. So what's the halacha? Two of the members of the Sanhedrin serve as witnesses, and they testify in front of the rest of the Sanhedrin body. So it says the Gemara, why do you need that? If the Sanhedrin sees the moon, so what are they supposed to say? You hear this, listen to how strange this is. The Sanhedrin is out. There's a Sanhedrin field trip, right? They're all out together. They see the moon. So now the Mishnah says, okay, here's what has to happen. Two of the members of the Sanhedrin have to separate from the group. They become the witnesses, testify in front of the rest of the group. Why do you have to rely on testimony? They saw the moon. Gedola re'iyah mishmiya. So isn't seeing it better than hearing it, right? When you accept testimony, you are relying on what someone else said versus relying on something that you see with your own eyes. Says the Gemara Mizera, Kigon Shra'u Balayla. No, what's the case? It's actually very interesting. The case is where they saw the moon at night. So we'll say, here's what's fascinating. Because they saw what the Gemara seems to be saying over here is as follows. If you look at Rashi, Shra'u Balayla, Hilchach Lamachar, Ilav Shmiya Amai Kadshu. So Rashi seems to be saying something fascinating here. Rashi says that Einachinami, you could be right. That if Beis Din were to see it, they could act based on what they saw. But that would only work if there was an immediacy between what they saw and the ability to declare. If there's an immediacy, then perhaps you could say, Gedola Re'iyah Mishmiya. Seeing is even greater than hearing. But because in this case they're seeing it at night, therefore there's a lack of immediacy. Why is there a lack of immediacy? Why? Because Beis Din doesn't sit at night. So they're going to see at night, but yet not begin the process until the next morning. At that point in time, Rashi says, there's no connection anymore between what they saw and what they're going to be ultimately be done, judge about, and therefore they have to rely on testimony. Which sounds like, according to Rashi, that if somehow, some way they were to see the new moon by day, then what? They'd be able to declare based on what they saw, which again, I don't believe that's halacha l'maisa, but that seems to be the inference from Rashi. Okay, fascinating. Rosh Shveim Beis Din Yam Dushan Yoshiv Mechavrim Eitzel Yochid. So we'll say now, watch this. Case number three. You have a Beis Din of three. They all saw the new moon. So what's the halacha? Two of them separate to serve as witnesses, right? And then obviously they have to find two more guys now to sit on the Beis Din, to join in the Beis Din. So the Gemara says, Amai. Why don't we see the same thing? If a Beis Din of three sees the new moon, so shouldn't seeing be better than hearing? And maybe you'll say this is the same case, they saw the moon at night, and therefore there's no immediacy between what they saw and the judicial process. That is the same case as the one you just said before. No, what the last case teaches us, Rabbi Say, is a principle we've already seen before, namely that halacha l'maisa, one person is not believed to testify regarding the new moon. The Sakatay Tchamina, Hoel Utnan, Dine Mamanas B'Shlosha, Tim Hayamumcha, L'Rabim, Don Afilu B'Yachid. I should say differently, that one person is not believed to serve as a Beis Din. So the Gemara says, why now? Why would you have a Havamina that one person could serve as a Beis Din? Listen to this, because we actually have a concept like this in halacha. Dine Mamanas, financial law, has to be decided by a Beis Din of at least three people. But if someone is a recognized expert, now both say, not recognized by himself. There are a lot of self-recognized experts, right? We're talking about somebody who's recognized by the rabbin, right? He's recognized by the general public as being an expert. Dan afilu b'yachid. So we'll say this is actually quite fascinating. You can, under certain circumstances, have a Beis Din of one. It could happen when it's a situation ultimately, again, where the person is a recognized expert. So you might have thought, Hachanami, Nikad Shebi Yechidi. So you might have thought again, that what happens if you have three guys, they're Beis Din, right? One of them happens to be a recognized lunar expert. Right? The only person I like Rabbi Heber, right? One of them happens to be Rabbi Heber. Just came out with a sefer actually, which is fascinating about all of these calendrical calculations. In any event, let's say again, let's say you have somebody who's a recognized lunar expert. You might have thought, okay, 3 people saw the moon. Let 2 of them separate as witnesses, because we've already seen you need witnesses even if everybody sees it, and let the one expert remain as the Beis Din. Kamash Malondom. Kamash Rabo said that you have to go ahead and add 2 more, even if the one remaining guy is an expert. But why not? In other words, if this indeed works by monetary law, then why shouldn't it work by Kiddush HaChodesh as well? So the Gemara says, because Because Rabo said the truth is when it came to the moon, there was no greater expert in lunar realities or lunar formations than Moshe Rabbeinu, right? But yet even HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, you by yourself are not enough. Now with Moshe, it happened to be that he had Aaron with him. So we'll say this is incredible. So that, in other words, if it was true that a mumcha, that an individual expert could be Mekadesh the Chodesh, could serve as the Beis Din, so to speak, then Moshe Rabbeinu should have been able to do it by himself. But the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, it has to be you and Aaron, now again, obviously, there's still a kasha, that's only 2, we need 3. But again, the point the Gemara is making over here is that a Yachid Mumcha cannot do it himself. Therefore, Allah L'maisa, in this case, where a Beis Din of 3 people saw the moon, 2 of them become witnesses. That only leaves 1 for the Beis Din. You add on 2 more people to the Beis Din, so they could be a proper 3-person Beis Din. I will say this Gemara is very striking because the Gemara here says Ein lecha mumcha l'Rabbi Yisrael yoser mi-Moshe. Here's what say. Rashi on the pasuk that says HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodashim. So the pasuk says Rashi is bothered by hazeh, and what is Rashi quoting on the pasuk? You'll look it up. Rashi says Niskasha Moshe al molad halavana. Moshe Rabbeinu could not figure out what the Ribono Shel Olam was talking about. So what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do to him? He said, or do for him? Ribono Shel Olam Kiviyachol pointed to the moon. And he said, Chodesh Hazeh, when the moon looks like this. So we'll say, isn't this incredible? So Niskasha Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu did not understand Kiddush HaChodesh. He did not understand what the moon was supposed to look like. And here the Gemara says, Ein lecha mumcha l'Rabim yoser mi Moshe Rabbeinu. There is no greater mumcha more than Moshe, which I will say tells you something absolutely amazing, which is even the things we struggle with in life, we have the ability to develop proficiency. Even the things which right now are my weaknesses, even the things which I can't wrap my head around, even the things which I feel like I can't overcome, if I put my mind to it, maybe I can not only overcome it, but maybe I could even become a mumcha. A Moshe Rabbeinu who didn't understand the Levana is called mumcha, which is really incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Leumas nisim delok Rabbi Akiva. We'll say this is fascinating. Our Mishnah clearly does not reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. Why? What did Rabbi Akiva say? Tisanya Sanhedrin Shera'u Echad Harages Hanefesh. Listen to this case. Let's say Reuven murders Shimon in front of the Sanhedrin. Talk about poor timing, right? So Reuben goes ahead and kills Shimon right in front of the Sanhedrin. So what's the halacha? Top of Chavav, Miksasa na'asu edim, Miksasu na'asu dayan. So now remember, so we'll call it 2 members of the group, or whatever number of the group, go ahead and become witnesses, and the rest serve as the basis. So what ends up happening over here, the Gemara says, dear Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon says that essentially, we'll call it 2 members of the Sanhedrin recuse themselves from the Beis Din, and they testify in front of the remaining members of the Sanhedrin. And then the remaining members of the Sanhedrin ultimately serve as the judges. Rashi says, Miksasana edim ve'edim b'fnei chaverem, degabe dini nefashos eidos b'oinu d'chsev al pi shnayim edim yumas hames. So we'll say, so again, remember, once again, you could ask, isn't Re'iyah better than Shmir? The Sanhedrin saw it. No, because again, there's a process, and the process requires actual testimony. That's Rabbi Tarfon. Watch this. Rabbi Akiva Omer, no, kulan na'asu edim. This is incredible. Rabbi Akiva says, incorrect. When the Sanhedrin observes something, they are no longer able to serve as the judges. They can't serve as the court. Rather, again, they're all edim, they're all witnesses. And look what Rabbi Akiva says, Ve'ein eid na'aseh dayon. And an aid, a witness, cannot become a judge. Cannot become a judge. So I'll say, so the Gemara says, therefore you see over here, our Mishnah clearly doesn't reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva. Why not? Because what does our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah says, right, 3 witnesses see the new moon. So 3 people, a Beis Din sees the new moon. So what happens? 2 of them become witnesses, right? And one of them remains a judge. And you just added 2 more people to the tribunal of the Beis Din. So Rabbi Akiva would say, no. Once a group witnesses something, right, they're no longer dayanim, they can't be judges. Rather, by definition, they're all eidim. So our Mishnah clearly doesn't reflect the view of Rabbi Akiva, to which the Gemara says, no. Afilu tim Rabbi Akiva, ad kalokam Rabbi Akiva hasam ela b'dinei nefashos, tirachmana amar v'shaftu ha'ida v'tzilu ha'ida. Rabbi Akiva says, no, this is only a din by capital crimes. Only by capital crimes do we say that a witness cannot become a judge. And once you witness something, by definition, you cannot serve in a judicial capacity. Why? Because the pasuk says, "V'shaftu ha'ida v'tzilu ha'ida." The pasuk says that literally the congregation will judge him and they will save him. Which means, I will say that there is an obligation upon Beis Din to try to find a way to save the murderer from being sentenced to death. That's how the judicial system is set up. Right? Rashi said, "Bimahapech b'schuso." Find some type of merit. It doesn't mean merit mitzvahs that he did. What it means is that the way the judicial system is slanted is that in capital cases, we try to find any excuse not to execute. And the problem over here is v'chivan dechazyuhu dekatel nafshe. The problem is once the Sanhedrin actually saw Reuven kill Shimon, lo matzu le'schusei. If they observed the murder, it's impossible for them to be malamed tzchus, impossible for them to find something favorable in the murderer. Aval hocha afilu Rabbi Akiva modeh. So we'll say, so Rabbi Akiva holds in eid na'aseh dayon that a witness cannot become a judge in capital cases, and that's for a very specific reason, because halacha l'maaseh it is the job of the court to find a schus for the murderer that ultimately, again, would at least get him off the hook from execution. That's their job. And if you observe the event, Rabbi Akiva says, it is impossible that you are going to find the schus for the murderer. But by Kiddush HaChodesh, even Rabbi Akiva would agree that an aid could become a dayon, because that same wrinkle that exists by capital cases does not exist by Kiddush HaChodesh. And I will say that is indeed how the Rambam baskins, that ultimately, again, but at least by Kiddush HaChodesh, aid na'aseh dayon. But I will say, I want to tell you something amazing based on Rabbi Akiva's statement. What is Rabbi Akiva really saying? What is he really saying? He's saying something so incredible. When we see things, everybody likes to say that they're not judgmental. Everyone is judgmental. Everyone is judgmental. And if you think you're not judgmental, you're just maybe you're not judgmental, you're just delusional, right? Everyone is judgmental. And when we see something, by definition, we automatically pass judgment. We pass it. It's just, and again, that's what Rabbi Akiva is saying. Ein eid na'aseh dayon means that when you see something, you've formed an opinion about it already, right? You see someone, we do this all the time, you see someone, how they're dressed, how they act, how they behave, they don't even say one word, and you already have them sized up. Again, we don't like to admit this, but this is part of human nature. We create a construct of judgment of every single person who walks within our Dalet Amas. So Rabbi Akiva is saying, just recognize how inherently judgmental we are. Ein eid na'aseh dayon means that we form an opinion from initial interactions. And once I form an opinion, it's very hard to be objective. It's very hard to be impartial. And I will say, what an incredibly important way to live life, to recognize that we are judgmental. And to recognize, we'll say, how many times has it happened that you see someone, you ever see people who have like an angry look to them? Like an angry look. And you see them and you're like, wow, like I don't want to have anything to do. And then what happens? They open up their mouth and they speak so softly and they're so nice. You're like, wow, I didn't expect that. You look like such a jerk, right? And now you seem like so nice. And it happens all the time where someone's dressed a certain way and you pass a certain judgment based on them, based on the way, how in any direction. And I will say, Rabbi Akiva says, yeah, ein eid na'aseh dayon. Know that you're judgmental. It's so important for us to recognize and to accept the fact. We have to work on it, but inherently, innately, we are judgmental. We form opinions about anyone and everything immediately. So to recognize that we are pretty much biased in every single thing in life. I was thinking that when Rabbi Yitzchok read this Gemara, he must have said, I never saw it, but he must have said, Ribono shel olam, ein eid na'asa dayan. Right? This is the greatest defense of Klal Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you see everything, you have eidos for everything, then you can't be a dayan. You can't judge either. You see all my averos. If you see me do it, then by definition, you can't be the judge. And I think Rabbi Yitzchok would have said something like that. Being the great advocate of Klal Yisrael, it's such a good defense for Klal Yisrael. If you see it, ein eid na'asa dayan. Let's go weiter. We'll see now we come to Hilchos Rosh Hashana. Kol hashofros ksherim chutz mishal para. All shofros are kosher except for that of a cow. Mipnei shehi keren. Ultimately, again, because it is not called a shofar, but rather it is called a keren. It's called a horn. Rabbi Yossi says, first of all, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over Shu Karen, Eino Kari Shofar, right? The horn of a cow is not called a shofar. Rather, again, the Gabi Yom Kippurim Shofar Ksiv, Avarta Shofar Trua. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi, Valo Kala Shofros Nikru Karen. But one second, all other shofros are also called the karen. They're also called horns. Shnemar bimshoch karen hayovel. Bimshoch big karen hayovel. Ultimately, again, when you will blow the karen and the yovel, again, we'll talk about this in the Gemara, what exactly this exchange means. So, mostly here, the Gemara introduces us to the idea that in order for something to be used as a shofar, it has to be called a shofar and not a karen. Says the Gemara, Shapir Kam Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan. Shapir Kam Rabbi Yossi. So we'll say, so remember again, we have fundamental machlokes. Rabbanan say you can't use the horn of a cow for shofar because it's called a keren. Rabbi Yossi says, one second, every shofar is called a keren. Bimshoch bekeren hayovel. So it says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi is saying good. He's saying good. So what do the Rabbanan do with this? For Rabbanan, kala shofros ikru shofar ve'ikru keren. The para keren ikri, shofar lo ikri. The Rabbanan will answer. They will say, you're right, Rabbi Yossi. All shofros are called keren. But not all kerens or kronos are called shofros. So the horn of a cow is called a keren, but it's not called a shofar. Versus again, let's say the horn of a ram, the horn of a goat, those are called keren, but they're also called shofar. Tichsiv bechor shoro hadar lo, v'kani re'im karnov. As I will say, because it says bechor shoro hadar lo, v'kani re'im karnov. Rabbi Yossi Amar Lecha, dipara nami ikri shofar. We'll say, watch this. Rabbi Yossi will say, it's not true. Right, the horn of a cow is also called the shofar. We'll say, get ready for this. Where do we get that from? Dichsiv vatitav laHashem mishar par. Because we'll say, the pasuk says, quoting over here from Tehillim, vatitav laHashem mishar par. Rabbi will say, just to give you the context of the pasuk, Rashi says over, vatitav laHashem tfilosi mishar par. So we'll say, David HaMelech is saying, the straight translation of the pasuk is, Vasitav laHashem, my tefillah, David HaMelech is talking about his prayers, my tefillah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is better, mishar par, is better than even like the biggest of animals, the biggest of karbanos. David HaMelech was saying, the power of my tefillah is even more impactful, more powerful than the most incredible karban. So we'll say, listen to this, imshar lamapar, V'impar lama shar. Now, both say the way we translate shar is an ox. The way we translate par is often as a bull, right? So ultimately, again, the Gemara asks, why do you have to say my tefillah is better mishar par from an ox and a bull? So the Gemara says, if you're saying shar, you don't need par. If you're saying par, you don't need shar. Get ready for this. Elamai shar par mishofar. Wow. So I'll say, Rabbi Yossi says like this. It's so beautiful. Rabbi Yossi says, David HaMelech is saying, Vasidav LaHashem, my tefillah, ultimately, again, is more impactful to Hashem than ultimately, again, even the shofar. Rashi says, Shar Shupar, B'yom Shenikra Shar, Hayagadol Kipar. Well, actually, we're not up there. So I will say, so therefore, again, you see over here that even the para is called the shofar. It's called the shofar. Now, again, that's a little bit of an interesting drasha, but Lamais Rabbi Yossi saying, Mishar par is Mishofar. So as such, the horn of a par is also called a shofar. As such, it can be used for Rosh Hashana. V'Rabbanan kid Rav Masna. The Rabbanan darshan that pasuk like Rav Masna. The Rav Masna, my shar par. What does shar par mean? So it means, my shar par, shugadol kipar. It means a shar that is as large as a par, an ox that is as fully formed as a bull. So the Gemara says, if you look at Rashi, Rashi says over here, shar shu par, b'yom shenikra shar hayagadol kipar, zeh shar shamai sebereshes, shebiyom shenivra, nivra b'kamaso, b'shar ben yom kari shar. So ultimately, again, this goes back to the Gemara before that we had earlier in the Masechta, where the Gemara explains that kol ma'aseh bereishis, everything that was created in its full form. B'kiyumam nivran, b'sivyona nivran, was created in its complete form. So David HaMelech is saying that my tefillah is even better than a shar par. A shar par, Rabbanan actually means a fully formed shar. Interesting enough, the word shar, which we're translating as ox, could even refer to a baby ox, as opposed to a par, which means a fully formed adult animal. So David HaMelech is essentially saying my tefillah is more impactful than even a fully formed karban. Okay, so the Gemara says, Ula Amar Hainu Tamid Rabbanan. So both say, so therefore again, what we have over here is as follows, simple machlokes. Can you use the horn of a cow or not for shofar? The Rabbanan say no, because it's called a keren, it's called a horn, it's not called a shofar. For Rosh Hashana, you have to use something called a shofar. Rabbi Yossi saying, yes, you can. Why? Because everything that's a shofar is also called a keren. Is also called a keren. I will say now, it seems to be even more, the Rabbi Yossi will say that the horn of a cow is also called a shofar. Where does he get that from? Ultimately from Tehillim, that contraction of words. Vasitev la'Hashem misharpar mishofar. Mishofar. Good. So the Gemara comes along and now offers a different approach. No. I'm going to tell you why the Rabbanan say you can't use the horn of a cow. I'll tell you why. The Rav Chisda will say, here we go, this is so beautiful. The Rav Chisda says, why can't the Kohen Gadol wear his gold clothing when he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur? I'll say, right, going back to Yuma a little bit. So remember again, the Kohen Gadol only wears Big Day Lavan, only wears simple white clothing when he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Why can't he wear his golden clothing? To which the Gemara says, Lefi she'ein kategar na'aseh sanegar. Ultimately, again, because the prosecutor cannot become the advocate. Literally, kategar means the prosecutor, sanegar means the defender, right? The prosecution cannot become the defense. And I will say, now, what is this a reference to? The gold represents chet ha'egel, the sin of the golden calf. So therefore, again, the gold, which represents chet, and to a certain degree, the paradigmatic chet, cannot go ahead and serve as the defense of Klal Yisrael in the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur. He can't do Ein Kategar Nasa Sanegar. And therefore, both say same idea. The Rabbanan will say that what? The Rabbanan will say that Allah Lamaisa, the par, the horn of a par, which once again represents what? The egel, right? The egel cannot be used on Rosh Hashanah. Ein kategar na'aseh sanegar. So the Gemara says, well, 1 second. So the Gemara says, velo, is that true? That, right, the prosecutor can become the defender. What about vaha ikadam par? Both again, back to our Yuma days. Remember again, one of the karbanos that the Kohen Gadol shechted was a par, and they would sprinkle the dam of the par inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So what do you mean in kategar na'aseh sanegar? No, the Gemara says no. Hol v'ishtini. That's different. Blood is blood is blood. In other words, you can't tell the difference between the blood of the par, the blood of the goat. So therefore, again, Allah Lamaisa, since it's changed form, we're not worried about in kategar na'aseh sanegar. Aiva ika aron v'kapores ukruv. But 1 second, we'll say there's a lot of gold in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, right? There's the ark, right? There's the kaporas, the lid. There's the kruvim, right? The two angel-like figures. There's a lot of gold in there. So what do you mean, ein kategar na'aseh sanegar? To which the Gemara says, chote bal yakriv ka'aminon. What it means, the Gemara says, chote bal yakriv, Rashi says, ha'adam lo yakrivu halom shuchatabo. The issue with gold, both is incredible. When is gold problematic? When a person uses it as part of the service. That's the problem. In other words, the fact that there's gold in the mikdash, there's nothing wrong with gold. The chet ha'egel is how we used gold. So what the Gemara is saying is, in kategor nases anegar, the prosecutor cannot become the defender, means we used gold in a way to create a distance between ourselves and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. To then use gold in the service, in human service, as a way of coming back, that's not appropriate. That's not appropriate. The prosecutor cannot become the defender. So the Gemara says, Ay v'hoika kafu machta, but one second. There's the spoon, there's the fire, well, it's not really a spoon, the ladle that you would use for ketoras. There's the fire pan upon which you would hold the coals. Halacha l'maisa, again, those are gold also. Chote bal yisno'e kamrinon. What it means is you can't use gold as a form of adornment. In other words, what the Gemara pivots a little bit and says, you could use gold as part of service. You can't use it as adornment. So for the Kohen Gadol to adorn himself in his clothing with gold which was used in this horrific fracture of relationship in the sin of the golden calf, that's not appropriate. If it's a service utensil, it's the aron, it's the kruvim, it's the kaf, it's the machta, that's fine. So the Gemara says, "Ay v'ha'ika big day zav mi bachutz." But one second, the Kohen Gadol does wear gold clothing outside of the Kodesh, right? Outside of the Kodesh HaKadosh, outside of the Holy of Holies. Maybe if them come in, you're right. The concept of ein kategar na'aseh sanegar, that the prosecutor cannot become the defendant, only applies when? Inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. It does not apply outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But one second. So we'll say, now remember, why are we bringing this up here? Because the Gemara is suggesting that halacha l'maisa, this is why you can't use the horn of a cow. Because the cow, that horn is also symbolic of what? The cheta egel. So you can't go ahead and use in kategar na'aseh sanegar. The Gemara says, but one second. You just said in kategar na'aseh sanegar is only a problem where? Only problem where? Inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. Well, shofar is blown outside of the Holy of Holies. So why is there a problem of in kategar na'aseh sanegar? Shofar nami bachutz. Both say this is so beautiful. Kevan delizikaron hu kibifnim dami. They'll say, you have to remember this for Rosh Hashana. Since the whole point of Tkiyah Shofar is to allow us to be remembered favorably before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that being remembered favorably transports us into the Holy of Holies. When you blow the shofar, it's as if you are standing in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. And because of that, the concept of Ein Kategar Na'aseh Sanegar applies ultimately to shofar as well. So the Gemara says, I'll just mention just very, 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 very quickly. We'll say, I was thinking about this concept of in kategar na'aseh sanegar, that the prosecutor cannot become the defense. If you think about it, it seems to be antithetical to what we learned in Reb Tzadok, right? In Tzidkas HaTzad is what you're thinking, right? Because in Tzidkas HaTzad, what have we been learning, right? That when you sin is the ultimate moment of incredible rebound. And not only that, but your sin itself highlights the incredible kochos you have, that if you turn that around, ultimately can become your greatest strength. So if anything, I would have thought based on Reb Tzadok, that what should you be wearing over all of Yom Kippur? Gold. Gold in the morning, gold, the whole day. So I will say, so it's hashkacha that I didn't get to say the Mesachik Bakovia piece on Sunday, because I think it actually ties in. But let's say, remember again, the gambler, right? The gambler, so we spoke about that he's pasala eidos. So the Rambam says, how does the gambler do tshuva? How does he do tshuva? He goes ahead and he has to break his dice. That's the Rambam says. So Rabbi Silber says, why does he have to break his dice? Why isn't it just enough to put the dice away? What if the Rambam says, he has to smash the dice. Smash the dice, just put it up on a high shelf. So Rabbi Silber says something amazing. He says in life, there's chet and there's derech chotim. There's sin, but there's the pathway to sin. Sin doesn't just come up out of nowhere. Sin is often the result, is the culmination of a number of other negative behaviors that themselves may not be sinful. And I will say, this is an incredibly instructive exercise. If I make a mistake in life, if I sin, it's incredible to trace my steps back and to see what was the genesis of that? Because generally, a sin doesn't just happen. You don't just decide one moment to sin. There's a number of smaller factors that led up to that. Rabbi Soloveitchik said, what the Rambam is saying is like this. If you want to stop being a gambler, if you want to stop sinning, it's not enough just to stop gambling. You have to break away from that entire derech in life. And the way we symbolize the breaking away of that derech is the smashing of the dice. The dice are not just dice. They represent a lifestyle. They represent an orientation. They represent a kivun, a derech. And the goal, if you want to be a bal tshuva, it's not just enough to stop gambling. I have to rid myself of that lifestyle, of everything that led me to this. So perhaps that's the pshat over here as well, which is that by not wearing gold, what we are focusing on is on the idea that even a cheta egel, a sin of the golden calf, Rabbi will say, when did the sin of the golden calf occur? Or when did it begin? When did it begin? Think about this. When did it begin? It began, the truth is, as soon as we left Egypt. When we're standing by the banks of the Yam Suf, the Egyptians are in hot pursuit, and we say, Moshe Hamebli in Kivarim b'Mitzrayim, when you took us out to die in the desert, this is what we need. We didn't have emunah. We didn't have proper emunah, and that first manifested itself by the Yam Suf, and then it happened again in Mara, and then it happened again with Slav, and then it ultimately culminated with the Cheta Egel, and then again there were a number of other episodes, and it culminated again in the Cheta Meraglim. The fact that the Kohen Gadol can't wear gold, I think, is the same idea as the gambler smashing his dice. You see, because real tshuva is not just simply the cessation of sin. Real tshuva requires me to identify the derech chotim. You see, this is why often our tshuva doesn't last, because all I do is I stop sinning, which is great, which is such an accomplishment in and of itself. But I don't recognize that it's not just about stopping to sin. It's about identifying the path, the lifestyle, the behaviors, the activities that lead me to this. And unless I'm willing to really stop those things, I'm going to end up right where I started. The fact that the Kohen Gadol doesn't wear gold is the equivalent to the smashing of the dice. They represent ridding myself not only of the sin, but as the Rav would say, the derech chotim as well. The pathway to sin, the lifestyle to sin, has to be eradicated in order ultimately for comprehensive tshuva to occur. So the Gemara goes later. But 1 second, here's the problem. The problem, says the Gemara, is that at the end of the day, that's not what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says that according to the Rabbanan, you can't use the horn of a par because it's called a keren, right? The Mishnah makes no reference to in kategar na'aseh sanegar, to which the Gemara says chada va'od kamar. The truth is, the Rabbanan are giving two reasons. Number one, chada de in kategar na'aseh sanegar. Number one, the prosecutor cannot become the defender. And number two, va'od mipnei shuhu keren. And also because it's called a keren. So in fact, the Gemara explains that according to the Rabbanan, there are two reasons that you cannot use the horn of a cow for shofar. Number one, in kategar na'aseh sanegar. Number two, it's called the keren. Rabbi Yossi will say, Dika amrit in kategar na'aseh sanegar, hani mili bibifnim, vai shofar mi bachotz. Rabbi Yossi will say, listen, I agree to the concept of in kategar na'aseh sanegar, but that concept only applies in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and shofar is blown outside. I, in that which you said you can't use the horn of a par, ultimately because it's a keren, I don't subscribe to that. Kol hashofros nami keren ikri. Kol hashofros nami ikru keren. All of the shofars are also called the keren. Good. Abai amar hainu ta'amayu d'Rabbanan. Suppose say Abai gives another approach. Suppose say, so Ula's approach was, according to the Rabbanan, you can't use the horn of a par, ein kategar na'aseh sanegar, and it's also called the keren and not a shofar. Comes along Abai gives a different reason. Shofar Amrachmana v'lo shnayim u'shlosha shofros. Torah says you have to use a shofar and not two or three shofars. What does that mean? V'had depara kevan dekai gildi mischazi kishnayim u'shlosh shofros. But it's actually very interesting. If you look at the horn of a cow or of an ox, the way it grows is each year there's an additional layer of growth. And actually, when you look at it, it looks like multiple layers. So the problem, says Abai, according to the Rabbanan, is it looks like multiple shofros. And the Torah says you're only supposed to use one shofar. Keren, but that's not what the Mishnah said. The Mishnah said you can't use the horn of a cow because it's a keren. So the Gemara says chada va'od kamar. Rabbanan is saying two reasoning. Chada the shofar echad arachan v'lo shnayim u'shlosha shofros v'am neshu keren. According to Abai, the Rabbanan is saying two reasons. Number one, because the horn of a cow is not called the shofar; it's called the keren. And number two, because it looks like two or three shofros. Rabbi Yossi will say. First, the intermediate wide lines. Rabbi Yosef will say no, just because it has multiple layers, they're all attached to each other. So because they're all attached, it's clearly one shofar, and therefore that's not a problem. Furthermore, ka'amrit neshu keren, and that Rabban in the chat, had a problem with the horn of a cow because it's called the keren. Kala shofros nami ikru keren. all shofros in general are called a keren as well. So the Gemara says, so this is the machlokes, Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan. Again, three different versions of the machlokes, but the machlokes, can you use the horn of a keren or not? Shabbos say again, it appears that really the approach of Ula is really the primary approach, that the Rabbanan say, Ein kategor naasa sanegar, the prosecutor, and therefore again, the horn of the cow, which represents chita egel, cannot become the defender for Kiyah Shofar. And furthermore, again, it's called the keren, not called the shofar. Rabbi Yossi will say, Ein kategor nasa sanegar only applies inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Shofar is blown outside. And furthermore, again, all shofros are called keren in general. That's the machlokes. Says the Gemara, by the way, my masha the hayuvla lishna de dichrahu. So we'll say, we get into an incredible sugi now. How do you know that which we call a yovel, a yuvla? So we'll say, because the Gemara in the Mishnah, we quoted the pasuk, bimshoch bekeren hayovel. How do you know that refers to the horn of a ram? So the Gemara says, this Sanya, Amar Rabbi Akiva, Kishalachti la'Arabia hayukorn ledabra yuvla. This is incredible. Rabbi Akiva said, when I went to Arabia, Rabbi Akiva traveled. When I went to Arabia, right, hayukorn ledabra yuvla. They used to call a ram's horn a yuvla. So Rabbi Akiva says you see that wording is used. Amar Rabbi Akiva, Kishalachti lagalya. Rabbi Akiva says, when I went to Gaul, I will say, it's not clear. I don't know when Rabbi Akiva traveled. It's possible that this is even before he was Choser B'tshuva, right? It's possible that even before, it's possible that he went on missions for Klal Yisrael, I don't know. But he traveled to Gaul. Hayukorin the Nida Galmuda. They would call a woman who was a Nida a Galmuda. Why Galmuda? Why do they call her a Galmuda? Gimula da mibaila. It is a contraction, means Gemula means separated from her husband. Rabbi Akiva said, Kishalachti la Afriki. He's got frequent fire miles, Rabbi Akiva, right? Rabbi Akiva says, when I went to Africa, Hayukorin la ma'a kesita. They called the ma, which is a unit of currency, a kesita. Lamai nafkamina leferushe ma'a kshita. Because they both say, it helps us to understand the phrase in Bereshis, b'ma'a kesita. That remember again, this is when Yaakov Avinu bought land from Shechem ben Chamor. They bought it from Meir Kesita. So Meir Kesita, da'oraisa Meir donkey is the equivalent of 100 donkey. Okay? Rabbi Silber says, so now what we're going to get into is as follows. See, just understand how this whole thing started. We tried to understand, how do you know that Yovel means a ram's horn? So Rabbi Akiva says, I'll tell you, because when I went to Arabia, they called a dabra, right? They called a ram's horn a yuvla. So you see over here that ram's horn means, right? Yuvla means a ram's horn. But let's say this opened the door now to a whole bunch of discussions like this, which are absolutely incredible, about people who didn't know the meaning of certain words, but found those meanings in different contexts. Watch this. Rabbi says, Rabbi says, when I went overseas, they called a mechira, a transaction, a sale, a kira. So the Gemara says, okay, who cares? Leferushe asher karisi li. Because Rabbi said this is helpful in understanding the pasuk. Avi hishbi'ani leimor hini anochi meis b'kivri asher karisi li. When Yosef HaTzadik is speaking to Paro and telling Paro that he needs to go ahead and bury his father, asher karisi li. What is that karisi li? That I bought. Amr Shimon Lakish kishalachti letchum Kan Nesharia, when I went to the border of Kan Nesharia, which was a city, Hayukorin lekala ninfi uletarnagol sechvi. They called the kala, they refer to a kala as a ninfi and a tarnagol as a sechvi. So the Gemara says, lekala ninfi mikra, what's the pasuk that alludes to this? Yefei nof misos kalara. So we'll say, so beautiful. The way we translate this is Yefei nof, a beautiful bride is the joy of the world. So Yefei nof became a contraction ninfi. Uletarnagol sechvi. They called the tarnagol a sechvi. Why? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Ravi, by saying Rabbi Shimon Levi, Mikra, mi shas betuchos chachma, o minasan lesechvi vina. So both say, what does this phrase mean? Mi shas betuchos chachma. Now both say, now the way we're translating this phrase is as follows. It's literally, who placed mishas batuchos. Rashi translates batuchos is chalukos, smooth. Who placed wisdom in the smooth ones? Rashi says, Elu Klois refers to the kidneys. Chazal had this idea, that wisdom resides in the kidneys. So I think this is also where like the lashon of, you feel something in your kishkas, even though the kishkas aren't the kidneys, kishkas are the intestines, but at first like feeling something in that mid part of your body, feeling something in your gut. So Chazal understood that wisdom resided in the kidneys. Oh, minasan l'sechvi vina. Oh, what does it mean? Who gave the sechvi understanding? What's the sechvi? Zet Harnagol. This refers ultimately to the rooster, right? So Sechvi is rooster. But I just point out the Aruch HaShulchan has a whole discussion over here where he discusses that, it quotes other Gemaras that say that Sechvi actually refers to the heart. Not right, and that's why this is machlokes about the bracha in the morning. Asher nasan Sechvi vina lahavchin v'yom u'v'layla. According to the Gemara, Maseches Brachos, Sechvi means the rooster, referring to the fact that Baruch Hu gave wisdom and everything. Aruch HaShulchan quotes other opinions that say the Sechvi means the heart itself. But again, the Gemara is saying Sechvi means the rooster. Levi Iglahu Asras, listen to this, it was a great story. Levi went to a particular place. So what happens? Asa Gavra Lekame, a guy comes to him and he says, Amar Le, he says to Levi, Kabana Planya. So Ploni was kabon me. He kaboned me. Lo hava yada my kamar. Levi had no idea what the guy was talking about. Right? So Levi had no idea. The guy runs over to him. Levi's in town. You're not going to believe it. Ploni kabonli. So asa shali be midrasha. So he went to the base medrash and he says, does anyone know what this word means? So what does it mean? Kabod. What does that mean? Amar le gazlon. They said to Levi, what it means is theft. What the guy was telling you was that he was robbed. He was robbed. He was telling you that a particular person robbed him. Because the pasuk the Gemara quotes over here from Malachi, could a person rob God? Right? Could a person rob the Ribono Shalom? Amrli Rabbi Mibarnish to Ravashi. So Rabbi Mibarnish said to Ravashi, "Ihava Hasam." If I was there. So the guy comes over to Levi. Levi has no idea what he's talking about. Goes to the base medrash. What does it mean? Kabon rob. So both listen to this. So Rava of Barnish said to Ravashi, if I was there, I would have asked the guy a series of questions. I would have said to the guy, Heichi kabach, how did he kabach you? B'mai kabach, what did he kabach you with? V'amai kabach, and why did he kabach you? Umemela hava yadina. And see, both say, what interestingly enough, what Rava Barnish was saying was, all you need to do is ask a bunch of questions. You can figure out what the word means. In other words, Levi, this guy runs over to Levi, right? Reuven was kabanami. He kabaned me. And Levi's like, okay, thank you for telling me. Hatzlacha. Right? Levi has no idea. So Rabbi Anish says, Levi, you didn't have to go ahead and just be ignorant. Ask him a couple of questions and you can figure out what the word is. So the Gemara says, Rabbi said, now watch this. So, okay, shkoyach. Rabbi said, in general, you have to understand something. Whenever you think you have such a dramatic solution and someone wiser than you didn't think of it, chances are they thought of it, but there's a reason why they didn't utilize it. So the Gemara says, okay, Levi, why didn't you ask? It's a good kasha. Why didn't you ask? Oh, you got kabined? I'm so sorry. Who kabined you? How did they kabin you? And why did they kabin you? Why didn't he ask that? So it says, Levi thought that maybe kabon was some type of illicit act. So because it was an illicit act, he was nervous to ask too many questions, as again, it would have been inappropriate. So because he thought that maybe it was like something to do with his nus, he thought maybe better not to ask. Okay, so let's listen to this. Lo havi yadi Rabbanan my seirigin. The Rabbanan did not know the meaning of the word seirigin. The Rabbanan say the Mishnah, Rashi quotes over the Gemara Megillah, Mishnah Megillah, Kara seirigin. Right? They didn't know what the word seirigin meant. Shamu la'amsa the Rebbe, the Bei Rebbe, the Chazin hu l'Rabbanan, the Havaka Aili Paski. So Rabbanan say, so what happens? One time they observed the maidservant of the Rebbe. Rabbanan say, a couple of these stories are going to be about the maidservant of the Rebbe. Rebbe's maidservant was a very, very pious woman. So one time they observed that the maidservant of Rebbe, the students were coming in for shir, right? But they were trickling in a couple at a time. So she gave them musar. Amr lahu ad masay atem nichnasin seirigin. She said to them, she was giving them musar, why don't you guys come on time? Why aren't you all showing up to the shir on time? Instead, you're coming in seirigin. And they realized from her use of the word that what does seirigin mean? Seirigin really means in pairs. From Amsa de Bei Rebbe, they understood the meaning of the word. Another story. Lo hava yadu Rabbanan my chalug lugos. The Rabbanan did not understand what the word chalug lugos means. Now, where do you see the word chalug lugos? Also, we actually had this in Yoma. Rashi says, Shina Parakam de Yoma, Kol Shiva Hayomim Lo Hayu Ochal Hashum V'Chalug Lugos. I will say, remember again, in the days leading up to Yom Kippur, there are certain things that they would withhold from the Kohen Gadol's diet. Among those things was something called chalug lugos, and they had no idea what was chalug lugos. Yom Achad Shamor La'am Sadabei Rabbi Dechazes Lahu Gavra to Kamevader Par Pechine. So one time they observed that the maidservant of Rabbi saw a guy sprinkling par pechine. Par pechine is translated as purslane. Amrle, she said to him, Admase atar mefarzer chalug lugecha. How long are you going to sprinkle or scatter chalug lugecha? So they understood over here that what's chalug lugecha, what's chalug lugos? Purslane. Lahavi yadirabana my salsila tramemeka. The Rabbanim did not understand the meaning of the phrase. Well, it's actually incredible. We take it for granted. We have Art Scroll, we have Safaria, we have all of these things. You don't understand something, no problem, look it up. First say, there are some hard words in Tanakh, which the etymology of them are just not known. So it's fascinating. So there's this pasuk in Mishlei. Shlomo Melech writes, Salsaleha utiromemeka techabdech ki techabchena. So they didn't know what is salsala. Now, tiromemeka means to be exalted. What does salsala mean? What is that? So Yom Achad, Shamor La'am Sadabei Rabbi. So one day, we'll just finish with this story. One day, they heard the maidservant of Rebbe, the Hava Amrit Lahu Gavra, the Ka Mahapich Bisar. Listen to this. They heard the maidservant of Rebbe was said to a guy who was always curling his hair, Amrle, Admase Atam Salsal Bisarecha. She gave him musar. How long are you going to be curling your hair for? So they realized Salsaleka means curls. Well, fine, one more. So we'll say they quoted this pasuk over here. What does it mean when it says V'santia lemoras kapod va'agmei mayim v'teitesiha b'matate. So they didn't know what does it mean. Now the pasuk over here is from Yeshaya talking about destruction. They did not know what it meant. So the Gemara says, Yom Yuchad Yom Shama la'amsei de Rebbe dahavas amrit lechabereseh shakulei teitaseh v'tate beisa. So one day they heard the Meir of the Rebbe say to her friend, take the broom and sweep the house. That's the Navi is saying. Yerushalayim will be so desolate that it'll be swept out. It'll be swept out. Last piece. The Rabbanim did not know what does it mean when it says Hashlech Yahavcha. Cast your Yahav on Hashem. What does that mean? One day, one of the rabbis was walking with a particular Arab, Hava Darina Tuva, and the rabbi was holding a burden, a load. So the Arab said, take your load, and place it on my camel. So I will say, what's the point of all these stories? The point of all these stories is Ezehu Chacham Halomed Mikol Adam. Right? There is something to be learned from every single person. If I'm willing to humble myself, if I'm willing to learn from every single person, literally, there is what to learn from the Arab, there is what to learn from the Amsa Debei Rebbe, there's what to be learned from the maidservant. But again, a person has to have the humility and a willingness to accept Chachma wherever they can find it. We'll start at the Mishnah Mirat Hashem tomorrow. Shkoyach. Avron. Ali Levine is naming his baby today.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
For a bulk of.
For this morning?
Yeah, just